Okay, so when we finished up, we were on SL5, and on this one, we're talking about find fragments in a paragraph and fix them, including cops, which is what we discussed earlier, which is basically just having some way for students to a consistent way for students to revise their work. So with this one, it's talking about capitalization, order, organization, punctuation, spelling. Sentence fragments, this one can be found on page 3031 inside the text. So in this one, you can see that, for this one, you can see that you're going to give students, you're going to give students an entire paragraph, like right here, and they've got to identify the sentence that is a fragment inside of it, and then they're going to rewrite that sentence on the lines below. So the reason why I really like this one is really for this main point right here. It's a true revision work. It also takes them back to the text, like we've always been discussing about that comprehension piece. So, if you're utilizing this inside of science, social studies, this would be, a paragraph or a couple sentences from the text, and you'd just would go in and delete a couple of those things. So, hopefully you see that comprehension and connection in a lot of this that we're going through. So let's jump into the next one. This is SL6. You can find this one inside of the text, the TWR. Which is on page 32, and for this one, it's really a word scramble. I really liked this one, doing this with some of the younger grades. I've done this with second graders as well as third graders, and with younger grades, you're probably going to do it orally and together. However, this one, you're going to be rearranging the subject and predicates is typically how you really start off developing it. Then you can scramble it a bit more if you'd like to, but in this one you can see his presidency, working to end slavery, Lincoln spent much of. So obviously on this one, we've got the students are going to have to unscramble that sentence to make it make sense. And in this case, we're probably going to say, on this one, we're going to say Lincoln spent much of his presidency working to end slavery. And obviously kids are going to have to go in and rewrite the sentence here, and they're going to have to use capitalization, those kinds of things, punctuation. So using simpler sentences for younger students makes sense. Doing it orally, all of those kinds of things are still part of this process. Don't be afraid to include inferences you want kids to draw from the text. So what I mean by that is not only rearrange sentences from the text, but you also can write a specific sentence that is an inference that you wanted them to extrapolate from the text. So, for example, in this one you have Lincoln during the Gettysburg Address. It's really about honoring those people that died, but also it's really about their death is going to lead to us doing, better things in the future. So, obviously what I'm saying there is that higher level piece, which is try to make your sentences not only from the text, but about those gap-filling things. What are those inferences that the text is trying to get students to understand? Because that's going to create a conversation around that too. And anybody who's worked with me knows that I truly feel the most powerful tool that a teacher has is their language. The better you are at questioning and the better you are at utilizing that tool that you have, your language and your conversations, is really the most powerful tool you have. And obviously you can give some of these a try if you'd like to as you go, so feel free to pause the video if you'd like. Alright, so let's jump on to the next one, SL7. Like I said, there are 22 of these, but this one is post run-on sentences daily to fix. So those of you that teach math, you know that you do typically do some daily reviews of math things previous. In ELA, you may be doing some other continual things for language arts. Everybody does these kinds of things where we're trying to get we're trying to have that happen, where we're trying to have doing some sort of daily reviews. That's really what this one is. So SL7 is really about posting run-on sentences daily and having kids fix those run-on sentences. So just like those daily math reviews, we're posting these things. Now, obviously, looking at the directions we're seeing here, we want them to read the sentence to determine if it's a run-on sentence or not. If it's a run-on, they have to correct it. Obviously, you don't want all of them to be run-ons because because you want them to be identified whether it's a run-on or not a run-on. And you could also tweak this if you wanted to, any way that you see fit. But this is a great way, to add in some daily review. There's lots of different daily prompts, those kinds of things. This would be something to kind of add in, continually bring it in until you see your kids with, that are very fluent with that. Then it probably wouldn't be an issue at all after that point. All right, so SL8, on this one, we're talking about orally sharing 4 types of sentences. So in this one, we're discussing the 4 sentence types. I know that, if you're a Creekview teacher, you're probably thinking, or intermediate teacher, you're probably thinking, oh, my kids know these. Yeah, they may know these, but they may not have been explicitly taught them, so it might be worth a review. Kids who are struggling, they definitely would need a review, so you may do it in different pockets, and maybe whole group, maybe small group, or even down into individual pieces. But the reason why you really want them to be familiar with these is not necessarily just being able to write them, but standing on the top of that, the next layer of that is when we start talking about author's craft and identifying that during a close reading, if they're able to really get in on those fine details, very granular, they're looking at, what type of punctuation did the author use, because there's so much meaning just inside of punctuation that it gets lost on a lot of kids because they're it's kind of like doing a multi-stepped word problem in mathematics. If they're not fluent with the adding and subtracting, it gets more challenging to do the reading and thinking about what operation they're supposed to use. So the same thing's true in this. If they don't know all of those finer points of punctuation, then it's harder to gain the meaning from the text. So hopefully that makes sense the way I explain that. So in this case, earlier grades would probably do a lot of this whole group. Again, you're going to be doing mini lessons on these things. All of these lessons should be delivered through a gradual release model, like I just said, and we should be directly teaching them. So SL8, you'll see here, and initially what you're first starting off with is reading, discussing them, seeing if together you can come up with the correct punctuation that would go on with each of those sentences in the example. Let's move on to the next one. Practice distinguishing the 4 types of sentences. So in the previous one, we introduced them to them and helped them identify them. Now we're doing the same type of thing. In this case, they have the same sentence, and then they're supplying over here. Well, is it, which one of these 4? Was it declarative? Is it exclamatory, imperative? Those kinds of things, and then they're going to write, write it down on the line there. Obviously, they'd be abbreviating in this example, but you can see they're identifying what type of punctuation would go at the end. You could have them, put that there, or they could actually put like a period on there, question mark, exclamation point. So it just depends how you want to do that. So it kind of can tweak and move that one around. But the point is, you're now pushing them more towards independence on this one. The one previous is done orally, and SL9, we're asking students to do that with punctuation at the end. Let's take a look at SL10. This is changing the sentence, and it can be found on page 34 in your text. I'd start this in earlier grades by doing 1 sentence type at a time. I wouldn't try to mix in a bunch of them. So when you get to SL10, if you're 2nd grade, 1st grade, you're definitely not going to try to mix all these together. Maybe you're going to have them, they're going to learn one of them, and then once they learn that one very well, then you're going to include the previous one that they know, and then introduce a new one, and then continue that as you get to all 4 of the different types. And you can add in more types as well of sentences if you'd like. But for the older grades, maybe start with reviewing all of them. So if you're looking at intermediate, 5th, 6th grade, you definitely want to start with a review of all of them. And then if you see issues arising inside of any one of those 4 specifically, you can kind of hone in that way. So I'd kind of work reverse of that piece, just because you want to honor your time, student understandings. SL11, which is writing an example of each of the 4 types of sentences for a topic. So in this one, I really love this one because the students are given a topic, like Gettysburg Address, and then the student is asked, all right, now you need to write a declarative sentence that goes with that one. So it's very open-ended. Obviously, kids are going to write different sentences, and I really like this one because it's kind of forcing them to more higher level, so to speak. And you obviously would want to provide some examples and remember gradual release. So you're probably going to be introducing this to them, doing a couple together, then letting them try it on their own. So you can really see how this would extend understanding of the text too, because you're giving them the specific topic, and then they're taking the topic, and they've got to think about, something that makes sense with that topic to write it in there. So really like that one, and it makes a great piece if you're doing a close reading. One of those CFUs, check for understandings. This makes a great CFU, a great checking for understanding, because there's no way a kid could do this activity without demonstrating what they know or don't know about a text for sure. SL12. On this one, students write questions. It says question there. I apologize. They write question sentences for pictures about a topic of study. So, real simple. All you're doing is you're providing a picture, like here, and then they are writing questions to that picture. They may say things like, why did Abraham Lincoln write the Gettysburg Address? They're posing these questions. And the piece that I really like about this one, I think often gets missed, is that we often teach kids how to answer questions, but we don't really teach them how to pose questions. And that is such a critical piece, and a big shift with the Common Core is this whole idea of having kids generate questions. And it's so deeply ingrained with comprehension, it's unbelievable. If you look at the research on there, just having kids question as they go through it. The reason why I personally feel that it's so important is if they're questioning as they go, then they're going to be continually monitoring their comprehension. And if they have that ability to ask questions and realize when they don't know the answers, then that's actually one of the most critical and pivotal pieces of being a good comprehender, is being able to do that. So definitely encourages that. And this one is totally applicable in lots of different things, because in mathematics you could pose a math problem, have them write some questions. And some of I saw a report on mathematics come out of New York where a school district had taken and pulled all of the numbers out of the text and had the kids just read it and then think about what the problem was actually asking them to do before they gave them questions. And that was very effective. So this would be a strategy that could be involved with that as well. So it encourages close reading, as I already shared, and it helps really spur rereading too. So that's fantastic things for that as well. On this one, it looks like we have here. Move some things around real quick so you can see it a little bit easier. On this one, it's SL13. So let's put SL on there just so I have it. SL13 says write test questions for key vocabulary words. And so wow, this one is really cool in my mind, because it obviously puts them in the role of writing some questions. And who knows, you might end up using some of these questions. So it's great to use in content areas inside of your instructional cycles prior to standards mastery checks, because it also, if they're able to pose these questions, they're anticipating what is going to be asked of them or required of them on the assessment later on. So I think that's a pretty critical piece. I'm going to blow this one up right here for you to take a look at it. You can see here some math examples that were put together on this one. So you can see they have this one says write word problems for the equations below. So they gave them, the word problems, and then the students had to write the math problems to go with it. So that'd be a great way to do it inside of mathematics. And then, for ELA or other topics, you've got, write a question for the answer provided. So in this one, you can see the answer is November 19th, 1863, which we know that is when not the Declaration of Independence, but when the Gettysburg Address was written. So they would have to pose the question that would lead to that answer. So a really cool way to do that. Can be something that's done, once they understand the premise and how to do it. It's something that you can just build into your instructional cycles, even into, your menus or any of the things that you're doing in that capacity. So great little technique to use. On this one, I'm going to slide some things over so we can see it a little bit easier inside of our chart here. There, slid those things over for us. We can see everything now nicely. I just put here on this one, you're going to be talking about, this is SL14. On this one is basic conjunction. So this is a very, very famous activity for coordinating conjunctions. So this one on this side is what we're really focused on right here. Oops, that doesn't look very good. So we're focused on this side of it right here, the coordinating conjunctions. And in this one, you're going to be having kids take on having kids use because, but, and so in their writing. It's found on pages 41, 42. Things involved. What is a conjunction? Talking about how it's combining those sentences together. So students who can rearrange, and I really loved this piece. This was actually pulled out of the text. This is not my thinking here, but I thought it was a wonderful thing to kind of highlight to you guys. Students who can rearrange phrases and clauses while holding on to meaning, which I think that's the key thing. So they're able to rearrange. They're able to rearrange pieces in the sentence, and they're able to do it in a way that does not impact the meaning. It still means the same thing, which we'll explore that just a little bit here more in a second. But it shows that they're more capable to read and write more complex text. So engaging them in these activities is increasing their ability to read more complex texts. Okay. So you can see here, walked through a couple things down here at the bottom for you. So in this one, you can see asking them to underline and label dependent and independent clauses. Here are some anchor charts that you could look at that help support you on that. So we have dependent clauses begin with subordinating conjunctions. Dependent clause, the example of that would be here. Independent clauses here. So it's a sentence that can stand by itself. A dependent clause has to have support in order to stand. And changing the position inside those sentences is really what we're working at. So if we look here, it says, we were amazed at the rainbow when the sun came out. We walked to the park after it was dark. So in those ones, so as this right here, we're going to take a look at these sentences on the next slide here. This is slide 1 of 3. So you can see here's a sentence, we were amazed at the rainbow when the sun came out. We walked to the park after it was dark. So now we're going to rearrange this. So what we'd be doing is engaging kids in this example here. So exploring a bit more, this is the same one, SL14. Having the kids underline and label the dependent and independent clauses. You can see here is the independent clause. It can stand alone. This is dependent. It needs something to work for a sentence. We were amazed at the rainbow when the sun came out. This can be rearranged without losing meaning. We could say, when the sun came out, we were amazed at the rainbow. And then so on and so forth. You can see the next sentence there. So feel free to pause the video and look at that a little bit more if you'd like. You can see though that the meaning is the same in those examples. So extremely important that we're helping kids understand that. I'm just going to shrink these a bit so we can get everything into the screen here. And on this one, you can see we're working with this conjunction still at SL14. This is slide 3 of 3. And this one here is the actual example for SL14, the one that's given to you. So complete the given sentences using because, but, so. This one does a great job of teaching those coordinating conjunctions and how to do that. So the teacher was happy. Inside the book, they do recommend using a topic that is not the one that you're covering. They do ask you to kind of start with something that's not. So for your first example, here's an example. The teacher was happy. The teacher was happy because, and then the students would supply the back part. So in our example, it says Abraham was a popular president. So then the kid has to write because, but, and so. So they might say Abraham Lincoln was a popular president because he wrote the Gettysburg Address and everybody loved it. Abraham Lincoln was a popular president, but the people in the southern states were not particular fans of his. Abraham Lincoln was a popular president, so when he eventually passed away, lots of people attended his funeral. So those would be some examples of what they could do. Obviously, we'd want to make it direct towards the text that they read. My examples were not per se that, but you can see that. As I said, Judith Hockman loves this one. It does help them understand more complex text, which is extremely important. SL14, again, I'm going to slide some things over so it's easier to see in the video we're doing. You're pretty familiar with this chart, so I'll just kind of leave it over there. Now we're going to be working through subordinating conjunctions. And you can see I put some examples up here for you. You still have the dependent and independent clauses, those kinds of things. But now we're talking about subordinating conjunctions, which typically come inside of the text near the beginning, but not always. So you can see working with subordinating conjunctions introduce dependent clauses in a complex sentence, which we already know that. Point out that we are working and adding a conjunction to introduce the dependent clause. So in this one, you can see the example. You're giving them the topic. You're giving them the subordinating conjunction at the beginning. So they're given before. They're going to have to put the sentence that goes along with that. Before Abraham Lincoln, blah 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 blah. After the Gettysburg Address, people, blah 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 blah. So you're teaching them to begin with a subordinating conjunction in this example, and working through the pieces that go with that. So next one we have SL16. Same example what we just did before, except you're using different subordinating conjunctions. So in this one you're using when, even though, and although. And then SL17, same thing. You're doing the same activity, except we're using different words. So we're repeating the previous. And these are the only ones that we have for examples through the Writing Revolution. There are other ones you can use, and feel free to do more of those if you'd like. The question that you're probably asking is, well, why is this important? Well, it helps them deal with sentence complexity, and it also helps them deal with sentence variation. Because these, starting with subordinated conjunctions, this typically happens quite a bit in nonfiction texts. And the more this becomes familiar to them, the more likely it is they're going to be able to read that text. And also the more likely they'll use them inside of their own writing when they do have opportunities to write. Let's take a look at SL18. Make sentences with just a conjunction that is provided. So in this case, students are doing well when they're doing well with the previous conjunction work. This is kind of like a nice addition. You give them a vocabulary term or even like a topic, those kinds of things. In this case, I gave them Civil War, and I gave them the conjunction, which is because. So then they've got to write a sentence using those two critical pieces. So, if you're talking about something that is in, science, you could give them, like photosynthesis, and then they have to use the word so. Then they're going to write a sentence about what they know about photosynthesis and use the word so for the conjunction in that sentence. So you can see how that works through that one. Number 19, again, I'm going to shrink this just so we can look at it a little bit easier. Oops, I'll make that look a little prettier. So I just have a little anchor chart over here that you could possibly make yours look like this. So we're talking about an appositive here. So we're going to present appositives orally first. We've talked about this a lot, that gradual release piece of that. So you're presenting it orally first. Do examples together. Things that are involved in this with appositive works is what is an appositive first and foremost. So you probably are going to have to teach this more than likely. Definitely earlier on, but you may have to review it in the upper grades. An appositive phrase is another way of saying or renaming a noun. You probably do this a lot in your own writing, just may not know what it's called or know that you were doing it. So, for example, you could write on it. You could write George Washington, our first president. So the appositive would be right here. It's renaming George Washington. Or you could write George Washington, our first president, and it would look like this. And you can see, you're putting it at the end, you're putting it in the middle. Really what it's doing is it's a short phrase that helps renames a noun either before it or after it. So definitely there's an example in here. This is SL19. Fill in the missing appositive phrase in the sentence below. Abraham Lincoln, the man who wrote the Gettysburg Address, was known for creating amazing speeches. So in this one, the appositive is provided, but you'd have a line there, and you'd have a blank spot with a line, and that's where the student would have to fill in the information on that line. They would have to give this appositive, which does two things. It teaches them, how to rename a noun, which helps drastically in making inferences later on. And not only does it do that, but it also makes them dig and talk and converse about the text that they read. So you can see how that works in it as well. SL20, fill in the blank appositive. And this is like what we just talked about before, except now they're actually given the blank. And this one, I did misspeak before, but on this one, you would be doing the examples together. In this one, they're actually going to be doing it independently. So in this one, I want to just talk about the inferencing. I started discussing it a second ago. This is a huge one. We know the authors, they don't write, when they write a text, they don't supply all of the information. They leave gaps And that's a big thing that kids struggle with as they are trying to comprehend. They don't have the same background knowledge that the author has when they wrote. So those gaps can become issues. The better students get at appositive work helps them make those sentence level cohesions. And that's what I put right here. You have sentence level cohesions. That's where you're given information in the sentence in one spot, and then you have to fill in some sort of gap, some sort of information later on. This is big. There's a few people who've done a lot of work. A lot of researchers have done some work on this. Kelly B. Cartwright is probably one of the people who are at the forefront of this work right now. She has a text called Word Callers that definitely is a nice text. There are couple of chapters in there I'm not a huge fan of, but there's a lot of great work here that she has completed and that you can see for these students who struggle with making inferences and poor comprehension. So they're typically, people refer to them as hyperlexic. So that means they can read anything you throw at them, but they have no idea what they're reading. And the reason why is because they struggle with this sentence level cohesions, which ultimately impacts their global level cohesions as well. So it helps kids learn to track all of these different things, as well as, we won't get into it in here, but it helps them track those pronoun antecedents as well. So students SL20A, so this is just an extension of 20. Students can create some of their own. For example, you give them the topic, and then they create their own. So yeah, that one's kind of cut and dry. SL21, combine two sentences into one. So now you're giving them two sentences, and you're teaching them to combine them. Keep in meaning, of course. This is actually proven to be the most effective means of teaching grammar. So voila, there you go. Students combine declarative sentences, and they're using the skills gained from the earlier lessons. So everything you've taught them up to this point, they're going to be applying it all into one thing. It allows you to have deep conversations pretty much about everything we discussed and much more, which is why it's the most effective way of teaching grammar. Because you're going to cover all those things, and you're going to start to realize what they're struggling with, what they're not struggling with. So it's kind of a comprehensive piece. It also helps poor comprehenders track nouns, track those nouns to pronoun coherences as well. Because the reason why it does that is they're going to have to supply a pronoun for the second Lincoln. They're not going to say Lincoln opposed slavery and Lincoln opposed the president. Lincoln was the president. They're not going to reuse that same noun over and over and over, which heightens their awareness to the fact that authors are doing that. They're using antecedents in their work all of the time, and that's what some kids struggle with. So this also helps poor comprehenders track the nouns, like I said. We're not going to have you give it a shot, but you can see they're going to be using coordinating conjunctions to combine these. They may throw on a subordinating conjunction at the front. Lots of different options, and you definitely could dig in and show them lots of different ways of doing that. 21A, this is an extension of the one we just talked about. It's combining 3 or more sentences. So on this one, they went from 2. Now they're given 3 sentences. They need to combine all of those. So you can definitely see the layering of the complexity of this. And again, everything we talked about before as a reader, how it's supporting it, definitely is going to do it on this one. SL22, vocab and conjunctions. On this one, we want to remember our mini lesson statements. We want to explain what a student is supposed to learn, why they're going to learn it, and give a couple meaningful examples. Definitely think charts, having charts up in your room, mini lesson statements, those kinds of things. It's a powerful, powerful thing to do. Lots of research shows that what we want to do is when we engage as students in some sort of learning, we want to make sure that it's something we can revisit. That tells students in their minds that this was important enough that it's going to live in our classroom for a while. That way, learning is not just something we did on Monday, and then we don't have to worry about it on Tuesday. We're going to cover something new. So, obviously, posting things, having those conversations is extremely important. Vocab and conjunctions, page 52. Being fluent with sentence writing is a foundational need. The reason why I say that is in the elementaries, we have to do a much better job of teaching kids how to be fluent at the sentence level, because it's kind of like building a house on a foundation. If you don't have a good foundation, you start putting your walls and your ceiling up, or ceiling and your roof up, then things are starting to get weak and start to collapse. That's what happens. So we want to make sure we're checking, monitoring their sentence level fluency, and are they able to do that successfully and with high accuracy. We should also be tracking and teaching this growth, like we've discussed. As we close, I'm not going to have you take a shot at a mini lesson for this one, but you can see vocab and conjunctions. In this one, we're going to give them a conjunction, and then we're going to give them a vocabulary word. It's flip-flop of the one we did previous. So you can see they're going to start with that subordinating conjunction, and then they're going to have to talk about the word abolish in there. Since Abraham Lincoln abolished slavery, then everybody, then the world or the United States started to prosper, so on and so forth, whatever you wanted to do in that piece. So at any rate, in closing, next week we're going to work on sentence level expansions and note-taking. You can search your Google Drive for the information I just shared here, TWR Sentence Resources. That's going to be in your shared drive. Hope you guys enjoy it. I'll shoot the next video on that sentence expansion and get that sent out to you. Take care.